Today we are going to talk a little bit about the colonies that were known as Upper and Lower Canada, that were British colonies that eventually formed Canada in 1867. But we're going to back up a little bit and talk about European powers and some of the problems they were having in both North America and in Europe. By this time period, we're talking about middle of the 18th century. The European powers, primarily England, France, Spain, to some degree Portugal, to some degree Holland, had colonized the North American peninsula almost entirely, with the exception of some large swaths of land in the north and, of course, in the west. There was even one point in time where the Russians were sniffing around on the west coast. But other than control of Alaska, there wasn't really much going on there. However, as one would expect in the area of colonization, the competition between these nations was severe for resources and the development of their countries. And along with that, and political considerations within Europe, where countries often involved themselves in each other's politics, including the choosing of leaders. Essentially, at this point in 1763, a war broke out both in North America and in Europe, called the Seven Years' War, starting in 1756, running until 1763, hence the 7 Years' War name. It involved many countries, including Prussia, Russia, England, France, Spain, many different alliances. It also took place in North America. As I said, it's referred to in North America as the French and Indian War, and many Indian tribes had aligned themselves either with the French or with the British, which would prove fatal to some of them as the winners began to be known. When the dust settled in 1763, England was the clear winner. They had defeated the French, and the Spanish were involved as well, and you could sort of peg them as being sort of medium winners. Big losers, definitely France. Now, at the time, there were a lot of things going on, a lot of resources that were coveted in the New World, furs and timber and fish among them, but also in the Caribbean islands, the sugar trade was highly coveted. And for a number of reasons, during the negotiations to end the war, France decided to give up some of its territories in North America and concentrate on its territories in the Caribbean, in part because of the access to sugarcane. Sugar was essentially the oil of the 18th century. So, to make a long story short, at the end of the negotiations, Britain ends up, or England, I should say, England ends up with the colonies of, or a good portion of the colonies of what were once New France, which, if you imagine a map of Canada now, vast portions of Quebec down through portions of southern Ontario, all the way down through the Great River Basins, right down to Louisiana. If anybody's ever been to Louisiana and experienced Cajun culture, you'll recognize that Cajun culture is really Acadian culture. Different story as to how they got there, but the French had a huge influence in that entire area. Some portions of their empire that they had in North America went to the Spanish, especially the southern portions, because Spanish come from warm countries, so they had no intention of heading up into northern Canada. And England ended up with what was once New France, which we kind of refer to now as basically as Quebec. England also had at the time, don't forget, colonies Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, some on Prince Edward Island, and some territories in what is now New Brunswick as well. They also had the 13 colonies, which were south of us, and the 13 states, 13 colonies that eventually became the 13 states. So that was beginning to brew around the time all of this was beginning to brew and happening. So England had some challenges on their hands, and there was no doubt they knew at that point in 1763 that there were problems in the colonies. So for that reason, as well as many other reasons, manpower and the challenge of doing so, they did not attempt to assimilate the French-speaking Catholic people of New France. Instead, they essentially told them they could go about their business, continue to build their areas as they did, continue to speak French, continue to practice Roman Catholic religion, and even keep their laws, which by modern standards were probably fairer to the individual than were the English laws at the time. So what happened then was you ended up with a large French-speaking territory, a large territory with French-speaking people in the hinterland, as well, of course, the two great cities of Montreal and Quebec City. And then you had the beginnings of the growth of English population in what is now southern Ontario. Then comes 1776, American Revolution, the Tea Party, throwing of the tea into the ocean, etc., etc. The British do the best they can do. They're not successful in putting down the rebellion, which turned into a revolution, in part because France assisted the new country of the United States, having just lost the war against England. And the Revolutionary War results in the creation of the new country of the United States of America, the 13 colonies forming the first 13 states of the United States of America, which then essentially becomes somewhat of a hostile nation towards its former colonizers, the English. However, in a situation like that, nothing is ever 100%, and there were a lot of people within the now new country of the United States who did not want to become Americans, did not want a Republican style of government, wanted to maintain their allegiance to the British Crown and become British subjects, or remain British subjects. And as you can well imagine, they were not very popular in this new country that was created. During the war, of course, they fought against their fellow colonists, or at the very least attempted to aid and abet the British military. So large numbers of them wanted to leave, and a natural place for them to go was to what was now British territories, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, but in particular, the very fertile regions of what is now southern Ontario. So a great pile of what we now call United Empire Loyalists moved into what is really more southeastern Ontario originally, areas around what would now be Brockville and Kingston and all of those sort of rural areas in there, full of United Empire Loyalists. So you now had this kind of dichotomy of a British territory, a British colony, with former members of the 13 colonies wanting to remain loyal to British. And then you've got over on the Quebec side, what is now Quebec, you've got French-speaking people. And the English recognized, especially in light of what had happened to them in 13 colonies, that they needed to maybe approach this a little bit differently. So in 1791, the British Parliament passed what's known as the Constitutional Act, which created 2 more colonies under the control of England, and that would be Upper Canada, which is what we like to think of basically as Ontario, but really in all reality southern Ontario, down towards Windsor and Detroit, and Lower Canada, which is Quebec. Now, some people have said in the past that the names Upper and Lower, of course, they were, thought maybe they referenced the higher class that the British considered the English people to be in the lower class that they considered the French to be. Of course, that's not true at all. It's just related to the geography of the area and the elevation above sea level. So in 1791, you had 2 new colonies being formed, along with you already had British settlers in English settlers in Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. And that is in 1791. And we already had a brief conversation in one of our other videos about the rebellions of 1837, which is really only about 40 years later. So the British set up a government. You've got English-speaking people in Upper Canada, what is now known as primarily Ontario, with some of the main cities being Toronto, York as it was called, as well as Kingston, Hamilton around the lake, St. Catharines close to the American border. And then, of course, you had Lower Canada, who were primarily French Catholics, with their intelligentsia and their business people centered primarily in Quebec and Quebec City and Montreal. So there you have it. That is how the provinces or colonies of Upper and Lower Canada came to pass. And in a future video, we will talk about some of the unrest that occurred in those colonies leading up to the formation of a whole entire separate colony known as Canada West and Canada East, which then eventually formed in 1867, joined with 2 other maritime provinces to form this wonderful country that we are lucky enough to live in today called Canada. All right, that's it for the day. Hope you enjoyed that and look forward to some future videos not too far down the road.